Welcome to the Micromobility Podcast. I'm your host, Prabin Joel, and today I have Kristian Brink with me. And this is our first podcast. Micromobility Podcast is one of the most popular podcasts in micromobility, probably the best podcast in micromobility. Has been around for many years, and we've been listening to them for years. So now it's a second phase of it. We are restarting it, and super happy to have Kristian Brink as our first guest. Kristian, do you want to just quickly introduce?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say it's a pleasure to be here. I never made it to the first generation of Micromobility Industries podcast, but amazing to be part of the second one and good to have you behind the mic, Prabin. So, congrats on this and bringing this back. I think the industry needed it.
Thank
So,
you.
this is great. Great to start. And yeah, I can just introduce myself, Kristian Brink, CEO at Urban Sharing, and we are a software platform for micromobility services. And in particular, we have been focusing on Bikeshare systems, mostly station-based, also virtuals and hybrid stations in large European cities mostly.
Perfect. So, a quick backstory. So, around 2018, when Cedric and I we were building a company called Emotion Labs, and Christian was among one of the few writing about bike share on LinkedIn, and that kind of got me, because I was new to the industry and nobody knew me, and I took inspiration from you and started writing, and that's kind of how my journey started. So, thank you, and you're one of the few that I can call in the industry as a good friend. So, thanks for
Appreciate it.
thanks.
Feeling is mutual, Probin. It was great those cowboy years of 2017, 18,
No,
19.
we can
Yeah.
forget that. The way I want to do this podcast is I mean, there are not a lot of people that know bike share as much as you do, right? And I want to make this podcast bike share 101. So, at the end of the podcast, the audience and me should have full understanding of what bike share is, specifically station-based bike share. Free-floating bike share, it's kind of common knowledge. Station-based bike share is still a mystery. So that's a goal, right? Why don't we start with some history? Where
Yes.
did this all start?
Yeah. As a historian, love a little bit of history just to get started. But yeah, I also think that one of the things that the first micromobility industries generation perhaps oversaw a little bit was exactly station-based bike share. I'm really happy to kind of get started this new era with a little conversation about where bike share actually started. I think it's fair to say that there's been several generations, and the first one, it's kind of by consensus in the industry, started in the Netherlands with an activist movement that was called Witte Fietsen, so basically the white bikes in Amsterdam in particular. It had a bit of an anarchist touch to it, and a group of community there in Amsterdam basically acquired some dozens of bikes, painted them white, which has also had quite a significance in the activist movement of cycling in later years as well, some white bikes. And they left them around the city and just let the population use them. It wasn't, I mean, the success can be measured in many ways. Definitely didn't last too long in terms of being a public service, but the story remained. At least it has its echoes until this day, some 60 years later. So it definitely paved the way to other systems. The second
Did it last like
generation,
weeks or?
yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much, pretty much some weeks, and
and
yeah,
bikes are stolen, vandalized, and right.
yeah. I don't know if they stole or vandalized back then in the
Okay.
60s, did they? When things were better back then.
I read somewhere that a lot of bikes were impounded, and some were vandalized, and it was very very less number, like maybe like 50 or 60 bikes, I guess.
Yeah, a few dozens. I don't think it was more than that. It was more of a political signal, right, than anything else. So yeah, fast forward to the 90s, and we have the second generation kicking off in Copenhagen with Bycyklen, which is basically city bike. I don't know exactly who came up with the idea, but I grew up in Copenhagen myself, and I remember especially tourists cycling around the city in these very clunky bikes that had some basically branding all over them. And they worked as a supermarket trolley in the sense that you would place a coin inside of them, and then a little chain would just pop out, and then you would go into another station in the city, and it was super mechanic. You would basically put the chain back in and you would get your coin back. So a free system, and it worked quite well. It was actually quite popular basically among tourists because Copenhagen already had quite a significant amount of bike riders. Just look at it today, even. And it closed down in the early 2000s, but it was definitely a beloved system. And that would be generation 2. And in 1998, we're actually entering the third generation, which was defined by automated rental. And there we had Clear Channel in Rennes, that is at least considered the first one, mostly France, where you had a physical station with a series of docks and bikes that would be rented on the scanning of a card at the kiosk, and then basically opening up a selected bike, and you could ride and return it at another station. This was quite advanced for 1998, I want to say. A competitor of out-of-home advertisement company channel was JCDecaux at the time in France as well. So JCDecaux, I think they went to something Vienna, Lyon, and then Paris in 2007, 2008. That was the big one. So Velib launches with about 15 to 18,000 bikes in 2008, and quickly becomes the flagship of Bikeshare worldwide. Cities like New York City, London will then look at Paris and go for their own Bikeshare systems in 2010, 2012, the famous.
But
Yeah.
none of these had any GPS, nothing, right? I
No,
mean, no tracking.
not as they started, no. Slowly, some companies decided to put GPS trackers on them, but it was purely based. The operators would mainly see their bikes when they were checking into a station or checking out of a station. But that was pretty much the GPS signal at the very start. Yeah. And then that actually leads us to the fourth generation, if you could say that. There's a bit of debate in the industry as to where the fourth generation starts, but we can say mainly in the 2010s. You have some German companies, Bike, all about to a certain extent. And in the United States, you have Social Bicycles a little later as well from Montreal, Public Bikeshare System company, PSC also. They start adding locks basically that are intelligent and have a GPS on them. And with the arrival of smartphones, also allow for the rental through an app, basically. So that opening of technology leads in 2017 and 2018 to quite a boom in bikeshare that originated in East Asia. With companies like Ofo, Mobike, Obike. I don't know if you remember those, Prabin.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody can forget them.
No, can't forget them, exactly. Actually, some of them are still around mainly in China. But I think the West kind of got to know this wave of dockless bikeshare with the news in late 2017 that Blue Bike, one of the startups from China, had entered a deal with San Francisco, or actually they had not entered a deal, but had decided to basically disembark a fleet of thousands of bikes into San Francisco. That that generated quite a lot of attention in the bike share industry because until then it had been mainly based on tenders, and JCDecaux and Clear Channel were the originators a little bit of this third generation bike share. They're out of home advertisement companies, right? So they are used to giving back to the city's public infrastructure services like cleaning of urban furniture or changing street lamps. And in return, they usually get billboards that they can exploit in the city. So bikeshare was kind of introduced into that segment of the economy back in the 2010s. So this new wave of just private investments into your own fleet of bikes without even a sponsor or advertisement was pretty new for the American and European companies that then saw in a few months a few new competitors coming into Europe and North America.
And that opened a completely new it's like it's almost like a new industry, right? From 2017, 18 that also fueled the scooter share across the world, right?
Exactly. So scooter share just came right after this wave of dockless bike share.
Yeah.
And it was based on the same thing, right? I mean, we have the story of Santa Monica, Bird, and how they decided, at least a few of the entrepreneurs out there in the West Coast decided to basically take these scooters that had the same kind of technology as a bike, but completely integrated with the front wheel and the brakes, just to put them out as shared vehicles as well. So I think that was a moment where the term micromobility was coined. And before it was only bike share. With the introduction of scooters, you had to have a new term for anything that wasn't cars, right? You had the rise of Uber at the same time, and Lyft and Bolt, but it was quite a shock for many of the companies that were going slowly in Europe and North America, city by city, one system at a time, to having 5 systems simultaneously in New York City or in London, Berlin, etc. So it came in with a lot of new questions about regulation, governance, economy, so on.
Yeah. So, question on how things evolved. So, GPS and smartphones that kind of made all this possible, right? When you look back, but then if you look at station-based bike share, it's not that the case. I mean, you can still have station-based bike share programs where you don't have to use your mobile app, you don't have to have GPS. So, if you really have to draw a distinction between, say, station-based bike share and the traditional dockless bike share, what are the differences other than what we actually know? Other than the fact that it's dockless, docked, in terms of tech, how do they differentiate?
Yeah, nowadays, in terms of tech, they don't have that many differences anymore, because station-based bike share has mainly caught up with the advances that came from the scooter share world mostly. I would say that the stations provide a series of pros and some cons to cities in terms of the possibilities that they're giving, and also the order that they're providing to cities, right? So we've had the case in quite a few European cities that were concerned about the scattering of micromobility vehicles around. So the station-based bike share, in a sense, survived these waves also by having a good reputation of an orderly system. GPS on all vehicles isn't something that we see nowadays. I think the introduction of e-bikes happened simultaneously, even a little earlier in the dog bike share world. You have cases like Milan that actually introduced e-bikes into their fleet in as early as 2010, 2011, way before you had some of the dockless bike share systems and scooter share systems coming in 2018, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, the tech is quite similar. I would say the business model is really where you see an abyss of a difference between the two these now.
Yeah. Just before getting into a business model, when you say station-based, right, is it like docked? When I say docked, take the Brussels Willows system where you lock to the station. There's also another kind of, I don't know if you can actually call it station-based. If you go to Zurich, you have these public bikes where you just park closer to the station. You're not like locking to a station, right? So when you say station-based, do you refer only to bikes that are locked to a station, or do you have other definitions?
The definition is actually, I'm actually doing something a bit wrong here by calling it station-based bike share, because in reality, it's more of a difference according to if it's companies that are mainly running for public city tenders or not. And then we see that many cities have different kinds of setup. You have Brussels, which is pure station-based in the case of the bike share that is sponsored by the city. In the case of Zurich, you have what we call virtual stations, so just next to a station you can park it by, you can just lock it. And you have cases like Gdansk in Poland, where you have all three. You have a complete free-floating, you have virtual stations, and you have station-based, all in the same app. So nowadays, let's actually put that into the clear. It's more tender-based companies and the more private venture-driven companies.
Reason being, if you look at Brussels as an example, even the scooter share or dockless scooter share and dockless bike share, it started with like true dockless and free floating, so you can leave them anywhere or everywhere. Now you have parking bays. These are in fact like virtual stations, right?
They are.
So
They are.
yeah. So technically, you can call them station based bike share, scooter share.
Yeah. So now the lines have blurred completely.
Exactly.
now they're doing station-based, virtual station-based
Yeah.
as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
completely.
So for clarity's sake, you're talking about, or majority of what you're talking about is station based, but then sponsored by the city.
Yes.
Great. So from a tech point of view, you did mention that we have GPS, we have we have mobile phones now, so it makes it much more easier. But station-based system has a bit of a different tech. Willow system, you can pay at the station as well, right? A GPS not so necessary with e-bikes. There is GPS in some cases. Putting all this together from a business model point of view, taking a typical station-based bike share system, how does it work? So just to give you, I mean, I think you mentioned saying if you look at all the scooter share, right, it's all either subsidized by VCs, a couple of years ago, and now it's fully paid up by end users, right? But
Correct.
then city-sponsored bike stations like Willow or Valib, the model is very different. So can you explain us what that business model is?
Yeah, we just have to remember that in those models where you have a city sponsorship, it has evolved from out-of-home advertisement contracts in the 2000s to the 2010s into becoming a complementary part of the public transport system. That is what it has evolved to today. So today, at least in Europe, I mean, North America is a special case, but in Europe, quite a lot of cities now see bike share as an essential part of their public transport offering. At least it has been confirmed in most cities that they see this as either first, last mile complementation or just in transport poverty areas that they can have a vanguard of bike share. So for that, if you either do it as an out-of-home advertisement contract or as public transport, both these industries, it's mainly cities that say, hey, I have a budget. I want to have this particular service. And then there's different legal forms to do it, but mostly it's a concession. And they would say, look, let's split the revenues. Whoever wins this tender just has to provide a fixed number of bikes, let's say 5,000 bikes to 500 stations, and you're going to collect the revenues. You give the city 10% or whatever is written in the contract, and then you have sometimes the possibility to get some sponsorship. Traditionally, when I started in this industry back in 2015, 2016, you had this pie chart in the business model when you were learning about bike share, and it was divided into three. So you had the sponsorship was 1/3 of your revenues as a city that had bike share as an operator. Another third was the city hall providing a budget particularly put aside for an X amount of years. And then the last third was the user revenue. So that was kind of the ideal tripod that a bike share system would sustain itself on. I would say it's pretty similar today. I would even say that some city subsidies have increased a lot since the pandemic. So we're actually seeing that part of the pie chart taking a little more space lately.
Let's take a typical city where the revenue model is exactly what you said, right? 1/3 from sponsorship, state giving you cash, 1/3 coming from the city hall, and another 1/3 coming from users. Take a typical system such as that. And how does it work from a tender point of view? So normally these tenders are pretty long, not like, scooter share tenders. These are like 7-year, 10-year contracts, right? What's the typical value of such contracts? How much does anybody that's winning these contracts, how much investment do they make? Because there's a lot of capital investment necessary as well, right?
Yes.
Who pays for that? Does city pitch in a bit of that, or is it like fully taken care of by those that are running the
Yeah,
system?
no, it's interesting that you asked that, because there's several ways to it. There's also a whole conversation to be had about how cities actually get the funding for bike share systems, and that opens a lot of conversations around the EU and the support that the EU has been giving to cycling promotion, and also through the kind of the tool of bike share. But mainly we're talking about widely different contract values depending on the objectives of the city and how they consider the bike share on their own. I mean, we have cases like Paris where we're talking about almost hundreds of millions of euros in just one large contract, 10 years, of course. But you have other smaller cities, which is usually the case, where you're talking about some few million euros. And usually the operators have to then do a kind of puzzle or figure out how they're going to find the stakeholders that are going to provide them with it enough to go and participate in such a request for proposals, where they will need some bikes, they'll need some stations, and they'll need software, and then perhaps also a local partner in order to carry out the day-to-day maintenance and workshop operations. You have to basically set up a whole new business on its own. It's a whole new ecosystem on its own. This is also a little bit the difference with the scooter share company, the ones that have derived from the scooter share waves, that these companies are mostly focused on brand building, and the ones that are going for the city sponsored RFPs, these create almost little islands of a brand, right? I mean, you see that with Velib in Paris, or Transport for London's London Cycle Hire, Beasing in Barcelona. And each one of them have particularities that make it very, very hard for operators and companies working in that space to make something scalable. And what you want usually in tech, right? One size fits them all, and a few products, but then scale from there. And this is actually funny that in urban sharing, we saw a niche there, that we knew the market and we had a little bit of experience in the industry, but it's not a classic VC or an attractive VC industry where you have a lot of like an insular landscape where you have to kind of tailor make a solution either on the hardware side or on the software side for each city. But at the end of the day, we see now a little more standardization.
So, going back to my question again, just for me and the audience to completely understand. So, anybody going for a tender process with a city, a 10-year tender, say that it's like 10,000 bikes for 10 years. So, you basically, come up with your own calculations, and then you probably bid for the tenders. And then when it is awarded to you, you do the initial investment.
You do.
If it's like 10,000 bikes, you spend, I don't know, 10 million, 15, 20 million, whatever that is, to set up everything. I mean, you make that initial investment, right?
Yeah.
But then
in most cases,
and just that the revenue, city basically guarantee some revenue. How does that work?
Normally, you will have to carry out the down payment of pretty much everything.
Everything, yeah.
Getting your warehouse, getting a team set up locally, customer service, setting up an entire new business almost on its own. And of course, procuring your fleet, which has the case that most of bikes are being produced in East Asia, Taiwan, China, etc. So that also has an implication to basically transport of these vehicles, and a lot of the tenders also have very unrealistic timelines in terms of delivery. So it's usually it's a big step for these companies that are still small and medium sized. There's not a lot of large companies involved in this industry, at least nowadays. So it's quite a small industry where everybody knows each other. And they have to lay out quite a lot of money in their terms, at least.
Got it.
In terms of revenue, it's actually quite different from North to South Europe. Northern Europe, cities are more used to sharing revenue from users. In Southern Europe, not so much. In those cases, depends on the Southern European country as well. You've seen places like Spain, even Portugal, France to some extent, making a lot of tenders, publishing a lot of tenders where they basically want the operator to collect all the revenues and basically transfer them directly to a bank account of the city. And in that way, the city can control the prices of the subscriptions. So if you consider this at the end of the day an adjacent of public transport, the cities consider that all the revenues are also belonging to them, and they'll give a price for the OPEX over the 10 years in accordance to what was considered in a competitive process that would be the expenses of the companies. So quite interesting differences there, even in Europe.
So if you take a 10-year timeline, do you think most station-based bike share operators make money? I mean, is it a profitable business to be in? I mean, it's a boring business, right? But is it like profitable, boring, profitable, or?
I want to say yes.
Okay.
We have a few examples of companies that struggled, but what an RFP processed bike share system will give you is fixed OPEX for a serious amount of years, right? Which is
Yeah.
always for an investor not a bad thing at all to have a clear idea of what your OPEX is going to be. The issue has usually been that suddenly they roll out the system, and after 1 year they realize that it was actually double what they had expected or triple, right? But I would say yes, in most cases, companies in that industry through operations carry out basically an inverse business model to make profit, right? Which would be to maximize margins by reducing and making efficient your operations versus the Dockless or brand builders, scooter share and bike share companies that are more focused, that are only getting revenues from users and are thus always interested in having a bullish amount of rides happening in their city, right? So you have this kind of inverse strategy of either making operations more efficient with a fixed amount of trips, more or less, or something that you can at least count on, versus just trying to get more and more trips.
What's the payback period like? Say for example, it's a bike share system, and say that I have a 25 to 50 million corpus to invest, right? And I'm investing in all this infrastructure, buying bikes, setting up my local company and everything, and it's a 10-year contract, right? What's the payback period like? Because I believe that the margins are thin as well, right? Similar to Dockless bike share, right?
Yeah, it really depends a lot on the city. I would have to say. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of the operators out there probably either a great time because some of them were able to start getting the payback after 3 years even. Some others have had situations where it's not up until year 7 or 8 that you're starting to get it. And I won't get into particular examples, but it has been an industry that is trying to find out how to stand on its own feet. Also be an industry on its own besides out-of-home advertisement, besides public transport as well, and have even an advocacy on its own. So I would say that. I would also say that in quite a few cases, the length of these projects and the durability of the hardware has also allowed sometimes for some extensions in the contracts beyond 10 years. So you have had cases where you had the investors get some bonus years when they were already expecting a completely depreciated and end of life system, right? So this is also quite a common case, even though it sounds a little bit far out there. It is happening quite often.
Assuming the same example, somebody has a corpus investing 25 to 50 million, set up a bike share, and say that the utilization is super low. I mean, you're setting up a bike share system in a city, utilization is super low, so there's very little money coming from users. Do you think the city would step in to save that company, or no?
No, I don't think they would step in to save the company. They would definitely give them some little smack on the fingers behind closed doors, and that is something that happens quite a lot. But at the end of the day, bike share is not just measured in over 10 years. It's not just measured in amount of trips, at least at the start. At the start, there can be a hype, but there is also a process of adoption that comes along with, at the start, sometimes a lot of vandalism. This was a huge problem some years ago, at least in new cities. And then the more that the population starts getting used to it, the vandalization curve actually goes down with the usage as well. And we've been talking a lot as well in recent months and weeks about transport poverty and how cities are starting to use bike share as well to go out to neighborhoods that are not that serviced in terms of public transport and generally getting into the economic centers of cities. And that's a place where bike share also can play quite a role. I would say that in most cases, bike share that has been carried out, a system that has been set up through a city tender, usually don't have that much of low usage. There are exceptions, but usually we're talking about numbers in some cities from 2 trips per bike per day to up to 10, and in extreme cases like, I don't know, Barcelona or so on, that they are up to 15 and 20 bikes per ride, per bike per day. So
Paris should be much
Paris,
higher as well.
yeah, Paris as well. It also comes together with some factors like easier climate than Northern Europe and also cycling infrastructure comes a long way to allow for this. But I wouldn't say that it has happened that often that you launch such a large system and you, at least at the start, have low usage numbers. You usually have quite a lot of usage, but then over the years, that's true that when you get new shiny bikes from other private ventures against a system that is 10 years old, then
Yeah,
at that
I
point
have a
usage
beautiful
goes up.
chart from Brussels
Oh
between
yeah.
docked
So talk
bikes and
Brussels.
dockless. Yeah, I mean, truth be told, I don't see the station-based bikes being used a lot. But yeah, I mean, that's a completely different story. Coming to unit economics, say that you have to model out a bike share system, a station-based bike share system. In a dockless bike share system, people bring it down to even one single trip. So basically, take one trip, how much money do you make per trip, and then split that down, right? Break
Yeah.
that down. How does it work for station-based bike share system? Is it the same, or is there any other metric?
Yeah, I mean, it should be trips really, and I think that's a correct way that
So it's
that
like
private.
so revenue per trip and then breaking that down. Okay.
Yeah, I think that should be the main metric for all companies. I would say a lot of the operators out there, also the ones that are doing it through public RFPs, work a lot with the unit metric per bike per month, usually in more static numbers, especially for capex investments, for the operations that are being carried out, and even for pricing different suppliers that are going to participate in these projects. That is the golden unit economic, I would say.
I think even Donkey Republic, they kind of model out similar to that, right? They look at revenue per bike per month, and then they try to figure out what the EBITDA per bike per month is as
They
well,
do.
right?
They've been pretty good at creating white papers as well with
Yeah.
CO2 save per trip and
Yeah.
excellent studies in the industry. Yeah, I think he's good at that.
So in for docked bike share, I mean, if I understand well, I mean, if I understood correctly, probably a better metric is exactly similar to what Donkey is using, which is like revenue per bike per month, and then trying to break that down, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a very financial way of looking at it.
yeah,
That perhaps, I mean, some would argue could go head to head against the more social point of view, which is how much of an impact is the bike share having in transport poverty areas, right? So when you put it more in the sense of, okay, revenue per trip or EBITDA per trip, as an operator, you would probably be encouraged to place a lot of the bikes in the highest income areas of the city and try to get a little higher price and then get as many trips as possible, right? And then we end up with a situation of quite a few large European cities where white collar people are in the end the main users of the bike share and not underserviced segments of the society, right?
That's a very interesting point. We'll come back to that, but just coming back to understanding, because I like numbers, right? So
Let's talk financials.
so breaking down unit economics, I mean, would you go for unit economics per trip or per month if you
I
had to
would
pick
say
one?
in my day-to-day job, I'll usually go per month.
Per month. Okay.
That would
So
usually be the case.
so let's take say 70, 80 euros, 100 euros that a bike share system would make per bike. How would that break down? I mean, do you have a view on what the unit economics model would be for that? For
Yeah,
example, there'd be a bit for operations. I don't know what percentage that is, right? So, I don't know if there's any license fee that they have to pay to the city from that revenue. So there's a bit of a breakdown.
we're always, let's just clarify first. We're always talking here companies that have won an RFP,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, they will usually not pay a license to the city. So that will be something that they have a little privilege of, because at that point they have a collaboration contract with the city, and they will either basically do a revenue share, or they will basically give in the entire amount of user revenues back to the city. And in return, they will get a fixed sum or something that is fluctuating according to service levels. And those service levels are actually the biggest operational challenge that operators face per city. So they'll usually have a clause in the contract, and I'll get back to your original question in a second, but I just want to clarify that in the clauses of these contracts, they will usually face a whole area where there's It's called service level agreement. And it will have basically the rule set of how to operate the system correctly according to the city. This is at least usually how it's set up in a relationship between the operator that went for an RFP and the city, right? And it will usually obligate them actually to not focus on those larger served areas, but also make sure that there's usually an offer that they can bring to underserviced areas of the city, and then at least service those areas better, right? So let's just say if a system is making 100 euros per bike per month, I would say that, let's say 20-30% pure profit, you would be doing 40-50% of operational expenses, and
Okay.
20 euros from your capex that you will have to cover over the years. Probably that would be a Canon textbook setup for an operator
Got it.
to go
So
for.
100 euro revenue, out of which 40-50%, so say
For
about
example,
yeah, so about 50 euros goes to just operate and maintain the fleet. And from the remaining 50, what do you have? I mean, you will definitely have to add some depreciation there, right?
there's some depreciation
Yeah,
exactly. There's also all the spare parts that you will have to get, and basically just entirely new
yeah.
orders of fleets. So basically replacing those that have entered end of life. So yeah, let's say a
Yeah.
profit of 30%.
30% net.
Let's
Okay,
be
okay,
bold. Yes.
okay. So 30%, and the 50% OPEX, operational expense doesn't include the rev share that you have to pay to the city, right? Or would you include that in the operational expense?
You could include it in the operational expense. I'm basically just putting out there the main cost of an
Okay.
operator without taking into account the payback from the city, basically.
Got it, got it. So traditionally, normally, if you take a a free floating scooter share or bike share, if you look at the depreciation period, because the useful life of a scooter and scooter is increasing, there are companies that depreciate over 3 years or 5 years even.
Hmm. Hmm.
How does it happen here? Because I believe these assets stay for much longer because it's station based, it doesn't vanish. So what's the depreciation period that companies use?
Classic depreciation amount of time would be 5 years. I've seen
Okay.
my experience companies that even go for calculations of 7 years, but
Okay.
the lifetime of these bikes is higher than the scooters as well. So you have
Got it.
cases out there in Europe where you have bikes that are 15 years old and
Yeah.
they're still running and they're still providing for the system to the pot. So yeah.
The next topic that I want to talk about is the ecosystem, right?
Mhm.
So we will quickly touch upon this point. So if you look at the ecosystem, there's hardware providers, there's a lot of tech that's involved as well, right? If you look at the bikes as such, in free floating, it's common knowledge that there's only a couple of them that's offering large quantity bikes. The names are like Segway and Okai and Navi, and there's very few of them. In traditional station-based bike share, do we have such large companies dominating the market? How does the ecosystem look like?
I would say that since the waves of Dockless Bikeshare that came in 2018, 2019, there was kind of a resistance that was created with some companies that we like to call 360 suppliers, which basically had the entire value chain in-house, even the bikes. So many of these companies from the RFP world or the city subsidized bike share schemes, they will actually build their own bikes, their own station, their own software at times. I'd say that after COVID and with the arrival of new tenders in Europe and more of an investment in general on bike share, we're now seeing that companies there are appearing a few specialized companies for the industry as well. So now you have an industry that is not just one company that does operations, that builds the bikes, builds the software and everything, and basically does 360 everything. But you have bike specialists, so you have a few in the market right now that are just out there for operators to make deals with, and they will run together for a
What's the
tender.
biggest one?
Well, There are a few, but I would say arcade and OEM are two large examples of bike providers in Europe. You have a few station suppliers as well, dock suppliers, and then you have software suppliers like urban
That's where
sharing.
you come
So
from.
that's where we come from, and basically providing a new sort of platform that doesn't require a whole lot of tweaking per city, but that we now know enough of this industry to be able to scale more.
Can you explain that? So, I mean, trying to draw parallels with free floating scooter share.
Yep.
Uh, there it's pretty straightforward. I mean, there's you have the bikes, you have the IoT connects to IoT cloud, and then you have your fleet management system, and then for users you have your mobile app, right? It's
Yeah,
pretty straightforward system, right?
that's right.
In a standard bike share system, what is involved in it?
Well,
What do we not see?
yeah, you'll basically have a software for the customer service that
Yep.
will take care of the end users. You have an app for most of I mean, it's pretty similar, to be honest. App for the users, website, data hosting, and connection with the IoTs on street. And these IoTs in this case can either be on the bikes themselves or on the stations as well. And why not? Like, in some new cases in cities, they also go for mixed fleets, not just standard bicycles, but also, well, e-bikes, cargo bikes,
Yep.
scooters as well. So they're actually becoming more and more similar, especially as
Similar.
you just mentioned in the case of Brussels, where you have virtual stations. At that point, there's almost no difference in the tech side of things between
Got it.
and a city-sponsored bike share system and a private one.
So the software that urban sharing would provide is similar to, I mean, so what you provide is fleet management system,
Yeah,
user app.
yeah.
Anything else?
We have two products nowadays. So we have the fleet management product, and then we have a separate one that doesn't require all the data hosting to be on our side, which is more based on machine learning and taking in data of climate conditions and traffic conditions and then historical demand, and then basically creating a pool of tasks for the operations team on street to be able to make operations more efficiently. And that
Got it.
nowadays, that's a little bit the challenge that we're seeing in the industry, right? That you either you tweak your strategy of operations for higher trips and then basically getting more for money for per trip, or you're making your operations more efficient. You want to downscale the amount of trucks that you're using for rebalancing. You want to spend less time on battery swapping and maintenance tasks generally. So it's one of those two. And we're not the only ones in the
Yep.
industry working in this, but I want to say that since the pandemic in Europe, the boom of bike share and shared mobility services has allowed now for specialization of the industry that I think is great. It's a green field for startups to think about solutions for the micromobility sector that we didn't have before in the 20s. It was only if you had a really big VC behind you that you would be able to invest in 30,000 scooters or bikes and just take over Europe or North America for that matter. Nowadays, we're seeing a consolidation phase, of course, still, but also a specialization of the industry, which I think is going to benefit many.
What's your favorite bike share system and why?
I have two. I mean, they're kind of, don't call me basic. Paris is really, um, is really an example and of a city that was committed, at least at the very first time in the 2000s and also in 2017 when they had the second generation of the leaps going out there. They've had a lot of horror stories around their launches and speaking of like crazy rollouts and so on. But at the end of the day, look at the numbers that they're having. Like we're talking millions of trips in 1 month, right? Even in a week. And I like to ask the question when I go out there and talk to people in the industry. I'm always like, well, we're always considering when cities are carrying out studies about the viability of bike share, private or city oriented, then they're just like, they're looking at the numbers of bikes in a city. That's already a lot. What can we do with 10,000 bikes? And I'm always asking, well, look at what is the ceiling of the amount of bikes that a city can fit, really? What is it that a city can fit? because you will never have a real alternative to cars, first of all, but also a real complementary system to public transport unless you have thousands and thousands of bikes or a
Yeah.
fleet that can manage to make a little bit of a difference. And in Paris, they've started out with 25,000 bikes. My number two, I said I had two systems, is probably Madrid. Little bias there. I've also grown up in Madrid in a part of my life. But I have to say, they started out in a system 2013 with 3,000 e-bikes. They're at 8,000 right now. According to what I've understood from the latest in their strategic view, by 2030, they want to have doubled that up until 16,000 bikes and even beyond that. New York City as well. So I like big systems. I like systems that have a critical mass of bikes that are not scared to go out there and make a difference in the city, because at the end of the day, we're just getting started in this industry. And when they'll look back in 10, 20 years to this day, they'll say, how could they even live with 2 or 3,000 bikes in one system? They needed tens of thousands in order to even make a little difference. So yeah,
Do you think dockless bike share, scooter share is a threat to a traditional station-based bike share?
absolutely not. I
All right.
think that private cars, and not necessarily private cars themselves, but the amount of space that cities have allowed to private car infrastructure is that's the end game to
Mhm.
turn around. And everyone that is part of that, even ride hailing, if they're part of the shared mobility ecosystem and are benefiting pedestrianization movement, accessibility, and basically allowing for more infrastructure and claiming back city space, they're just allies. So scooter
Mhm.
share, more than welcome, and the technology is great. I think the business models that were created were not great.
But you don't think that free-floating scooter share, bike share, you don't think that that cannibalizes traditional bike share?
I mean, we've all seen the studies that were out there where they compared, okay, bike share
Mhm.
replaces a car trip, or
Yeah.
in some cases, a public transport trip. And there are loads of studies out there that say a scooter share trip replaces a pedestrian
Yeah.
walk, basically.
Got it.
I don't think that that is necessarily always the case. It is something that is out there, and it's kind of common knowledge, and everybody talks
Mhm.
about this conversation, and the cannibalization emerges from that idea that scooters just cannibalize pedestrians, and as such being an issue for the mobility transformation of cities. I
Mhm.
honestly think that the problem has been the business models that were created in 2018 and 2019, where they thought that they could purely rely on scooters. You can't. You
Yeah.
need to have mixed fleets, and I'm a strong believer in mixed fleets in the future, and that each city just has its own needs. I mean, in Oslo, where urban sharing we're based, I mean, scooter sharing is I think Oslo is
Mhm.
the one city where everybody is using scooter sharing.
Yeah.
And there's just time and time that the city hall is renewing these licenses for private companies. It would be great if they extended those periods a little more. I think all
True.
my peers will agree with me. But hey, it depends on the city. In this Scandinavian countries, scooter share had an amazing reception.
Yeah.
Uh,
My last question. So knowing what you know, I mean, you've been in the industry for long. What's the next big trend in bike share, station-based bike share? Do you see some new tech emerging, new business models emerging? What do you see? I mean, if you have to like look far into the future, say 5 years, 10 years from now.
yeah,
So if you look at the last 10 years, it's mostly about GPS, tech advancements. What's the next 10 years going to be like?
I still think that it's going to be very tech oriented. I think e-bikes have come to stay. And I
Yeah,
think you will agree with me on that point. You have
absolutely.
been a strong supporter of e-bikes over the years, haven't you?
Absolutely.
But in I definitely think that ITS, information transport systems, are going to play a big role, a big part in this. Think 10 years down the road, we're going to be seeing mobility ecosystems in cities, and it won't just be that neatly separated by the vehicle. I think that we will be talking about a service-based economy, very much based on phone or whatever device we will be using at that time. And I think that the next big breakthrough will be when vehicles speak horizontally to each other on streets. So right now, We're talking a lot about autonomy well, at least this is the hype, right? Autonomy of self-driving vehicle, cars, etc. But if you want a world like that to work, at some point, cars and buses, for that matter, and shared bikes and private bikes, at some point they will have to communicate with each other. If you think about it, the vertical communication that exists today, with each one of these vehicles communicating with the cloud on their own vertically, it's kind of inefficient if you think about how efficient we could make the streets. If even the infrastructure, street lights that change according to priorities of people arriving at a place and turning on and off lights on streets, energy savings. I think the next breakthrough is going to be IoTs that talk horizontally to each other. And this is where we want to place urban sharing as well, in the middle of that.
Great. There's a very interesting company coming to Micromobility Europe, exactly building this tech. Anybody out there looking at the future of tech, come to Micromobility Europe.
I think they're going the right way.
Yeah,
Might be
exactly.
onto something.
We have Micromobility Europe this year in Brussels. Kristian is moderating one of the best Bikeshare panels we've ever had. I'm super excited about it. Do you want to introduce who's going to be on the panel?
Yeah, so basically, speaking of city subsidized operators, we've basically gathered a great sample of the operators that are now running for big bikeshare tenders in Europe. So you have Nextbike and their CEO, you have Donkey Republic and their CFO will be there. You have Paris, the favorite system, and you have Inerba, which is a big Spanish operator as well. And right now, these are the main participants, or the reference of station, or at least the city subsidized bike share, for sure.
I'm definitely looking forward to this panel. I mean, like I said, it's probably the best bike share panel we've ever had. I don't know if
I'm so excited. I don't think there's been a panel like that
like
in a lot of conferences. Exactly like this.
Yeah, so I'm super looking forward to it, and this has been a very interesting chat. I learned a ton. I mean, I hope we can have a part 2 of this so that I can learn more. I'm pretty sure the audience learned more as well from you. And anybody that wants to meet Kristian, come to Mobility Europe and check out his company as well, called Urban Share. Thank you so much, Kristian.
Thank you.
Thank
Anytime,
you so much for
Prabin.
joining.
Anytime.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.